Approximately 70 kilometers north of Satara, and just 30 kilometers south of the Tropic of Capricorn, was our next rest camp, Letaba. And we met not only our first red-billed buffalo weavers, but also the African green pigeon, which we observed behaving very oddly in the rain, as you can see here. Whilst the red-winged starling were not a new species to us, this particular pair's behaviour was. We'd never heard them making this precise call before, and certainly not literally sat on a branch screaming in one another's faces. We also came across another new hornbill species to us, the African grey hornbill, and it too was in fine singing form. The Mapani bell seems to be predominantly the domain of the ostrich, which appear to be quite imposing on their own, certainly at up to 2.6 metres tall and weighing 135 kilos, but when you see them standing alongside wildebeest, and standing appreciably taller than them no less, their presence, and the knowledge they can run up to 70 kilometres an hour, does become quite concerning. Our fear, however, was very soon forgotten, as it became very clear that the ostrich, like many other species, had also produced a significant number of babies during the short rains. We did see some familiar faces at Letaba. This dwarf mongoose, for example, was actually in camp with us, but much like us, was struggling somewhat with the heat. Some species were showing much less immediate evidence of the challenges that these conditions were causing them, most notably the primates. We were very grateful not to see the Chacma baboon up close, as the male's canine teeth can be up to an intimidating 4 centimeters in length. But it wasn't the Chacma baboon that actually caused any problems. Instead, their much smaller cousins, the vervet monkeys, who we'd met previously in Kenya, were an absolute nightmare around the campsite. We observed one particular troop raid several caravans and tents, and these 6-kilo monkeys would gladly stand their ground against a 60-plus kilo human. If, however, they couldn't find any nearby humans, or specifically humans with food to terrorize, they would gladly turn on one another, or on the babies of the group. As the Letaba River passes immediately alongside the Letaba rest camp, we did of course also encounter a number of hippo, including one that came up to the outside of the fence in the small hours one morning and proceeded to bellow very, very loudly, which is not an experience I can recommend readily. However, this rather charming individual, which emerged from the river under a thick carpet of water hyacinth, won us back over to the species. Zebra were another species we encountered in significant numbers around Letaba, with both large herds of females and juveniles being escorted by a dominant stallion, but also large numbers of solitary males. Far and away, however, the most significant species seen around Letaba is elephants, herds of which can be found there in truly vast numbers. We saw herds numbering 30 individuals or more in multiple locations around Letaba, and by carefully counting the number of adults and young, we were able to demonstrate that these were in fact different herds. Ostensibly, the density of wildlife and elephants is lower around Letaba than the other rest camps, largely as a result of the denser scrubland. But when you consider that elephants can and will simply walk through a thicket of trees that they find inconvenient, uprooting anything that they find is too stubborn to move out of their way, it may actually explain why we saw significantly more prey species, including elephants, around the camp than we had elsewhere. The elephants, however, weren't having everything their own way. The heat wave that was continuing to affect the Kruger National Park whilst we were there was having as much, if not more, of an impact on them due to their size, and the fact that most of the large herds had a number of juveniles, some of which were very young indeed. Thankfully, the matriarchs of these herds were experienced enough to lead them all to the watering holes which had been constructed for the wildlife to use. And often at these water holes you'd see multiple groups of elephants arriving. And watching baby elephants meet one another for the first time and start to play is a glorious experience. Unfortunately, not every interaction we observed was quite so positive, and these two were very much not afraid to start throwing their weight around, causing the rest of their herds and us to make a hasty retreat. Once again, anywhere that you find prey species in significant numbers, you're likely to find predators as well, such as this cheetah caught after a rainstorm and clearly not loving life. But we saw quite a significant number of cheetah near Letaba, which is unusual. This trio, for example, spotted taking refuge from the heat in the shade of a large water tower, are likely to be a group of males who have grouped together to defend their territory. But far from being simple alliances of convenience, these bondings are actually often very affectionate to one another, with mutual grooming often documented, and members calling for a lost member of the group. At least one hyena pack is also present near Letaba camp, and we found this out on our first night where, much like the hippo, we found one sat immediately outside the fence a few feet from our tent, which is not an experience for the faint of heart. Thankfully, it was quite uninterested in us, aside from, at the risk of anthropomorphizing the animals, a mild curiosity to our presence, and were more interested in the herds of impala which could often be seen travelling through the woods around the edges of the camp. This pair, however, were entirely uninterested in our presence. It actually took us quite some time to work out what they were doing. At first they appeared to be playing, but doing so in a large pile of rhino dung is unusual to say the least. Eventually, we realised that they were covering themselves in the dung, or specifically the scent of the dung, to disguise themselves, allowing them to hunt more effectively. As with the other camps in Kruger, Letaba has a number of lions that can be found nearby the site. This pair of males encountered one evening, however, still managed to surprise us and present us with something new, particularly their deep, rumbling call. It is likely that this pair were marking a territory which, as anyone who has kept domestic cats will be aware, is normally accompanied by significant amounts of spraying. While we didn't observe this directly, there was certainly a particular odour, shall we say, and I certainly wasn't getting any closer to see if I could work out exactly what was going on. Hello everyone, and welcome to my first on-camera appearance. Apologies to any of you who weren't expecting this. Before the final clip of today's episode, I would like to very quickly mention one detail. Kruger National Park exists exclusively for the protection of the wildlife within its borders. This means that humans will take steps to prevent harm caused to the wildlife by human activity. Poaching is, shall we say, actively discouraged, and any harm caused to the animals by human activity will be mitigated wherever possible, including the construction of water holes in a drought situation, for example.
The park staff, however, will not step in if an animal is dying of other causes or of old age. This is unpleasant, but a natural part of life and something that should be addressed, I think. I hope that next time you see me, it will be under more positive circumstances. This is the same pair of lions we had seen just a couple of days previously. At the time, it had seemed that one of them wasn't in as good a shape as the other, but to see one of them like this was nothing short of heart-wrenching. At the time of recording this footage, it was far past 35 degrees in the shade, and there were much better opportunities for shade nearby if there wasn't some reason for the lion to be staying here. In over 15 minutes of observation, we saw no movement whatsoever, not even breathing, from the lion on the left in this footage. And as sad as the loss of one of these magnificent animals is, thanks to the efforts of the staff of Kruger National Park, it is a stronghold for the species, and they are otherwise thriving within its borders.